Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Goatman encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/mythology loves horror. The Goatman of Lake Elmore. Growing up among the rolling, green hills of Vermont meant that I spent a lot of time outdoors. Even though I lived in the capital city of Montpelier, my choice of activities had always been camping, hiking and swimming. Most of my outdoors memories are happy, but there was one experience I had that made me almost never go camping again. My cousin Corey and I were on summer vacation from high school, and we begged my mom to take us to our favorite campground for a few days. The next afternoon we arrived at Lake Elmore State Park, where a ranger gave us a map with available sites circled on it, and we quickly picked on and settled in. Our first night was uneventful. Since it was the middle of the week, the park was almost deserted, which meant that Corey and I never had to wait for paddle boats to become available, and we got prime lake beach spots without having to get there early in the morning. The trip was perfect, until the second night. My mom wanted to go home on the second day to check on my brother Nate, who hadn't wanted to come with us, so after dinner she left. We knew she wouldn't be back until around midnight, so we entertained ourselves by making s'mores and playing card games. After a while we got restless, and decided to walk down to the lake. From the bulk of the sites, the lake is about a 10-minute walk, and Mount Elmore, which rises above the lake, is always beautiful at sunset. We made it down to the lake shore just fine, and we enjoyed the cool sensation of wet sand squishing between our toes as we built a sand castle. The sun was beginning to set in earnest, and we hadn't brought a lantern down with us, so we headed back to the site to grab one. I was eager to head back to the lake, but Corey suggested that we walk the trail that goes to the old fire tower at the top of Mount Elmore instead. I agreed, and we made our way to the outskirts of the campground where the trail started. An hour or so went by as we walked and talked, just enjoying the refreshing night air. The lantern gave us enough light that we didn't feel nervous, and we made sure not to go off the trail. There was only one path for most of the trek, so it was easy to follow. At one point a herd of deer came bounding out of the woods near us, their appearance so sudden that I nearly dropped the lantern. Corey, now a bit spooked, asked if we could head back to camp. I wasn't really ready to, but I wanted him to be comfortable, so I agreed. We had been walking back towards the trailhead for about 5 minutes when we heard someone in the woods off to our right. It was clearly a person, since their rhythmic footsteps had a 1-2 pattern. It wasn't unusual for rangers to patrol the trails even at night, and if one of them had seen us, they were probably checking to make sure we weren't doing anything illegal or destructive. We waited for them to appear, but the steps had stopped and no one entered the circle of light we were in. After a minute Corey asked who was there, his voice quivering slightly. I thought it was a little odd that we couldn't see a flashlight by then, but I shrugged it off and kept walking. If some weirdo wanted to be creeping around in the woods at 10 p.m. without a light, then that was their business, not mine. It was probably someone sneaking away from their family to smoke or drink, which could easily explain why they weren't coming forward or greeting us if they thought we would report them. As we walked I noticed that, since the appearance of the deer, the woods had seemed oddly silent. I can admit that by then I was glad that we were heading back to camp. We were about halfway down the trail when a voice called out to us, which we instantly recognized as my mom's. The sound had come from behind us though, and Corey and I spun around in unison. I shouted out a confused-sounding greeting, but got no response. Corey looked at me, concern clear on his face. It made sense that it had been my mom in the woods, since she was probably trying to get us back for all of the pranks we had pulled over the years. Even so, it was a bit unnerving that she suddenly wasn't responding after just having called to us, and she wasn't known for dragging pranks out. We waited for several minutes, occasionally calling out to her. I started to get mad, because by then the situation wasn't funny anymore, and I was becoming worried. A few more minutes went by, and I was finally fed up. I grabbed Corey by the elbow and began to march back to camp, grumbling about annoying mothers and stupid pranks. Corey hadn't said a word, but I noticed him watching the woods around us carefully. As we reached the last 10-minute stretch of the trail, my mother's voice once again rang out behind us. It sounded wrong this time, and I immediately thought she might be hurt. I spun around, the swinging lantern casting distorted shadows. I couldn't see anything but trees, and I didn't hear anyone moving around. I was slowly becoming scared, and I just wanted to get back to the safety of the campfire. My attention was drawn to the lantern light reflecting off of something in a bush nearby. It was a pair of eyes, but to my confusion they were about 7 feet off the ground. No animal around here could be standing that tall, even on back legs. What the hell? Corey echoed my confusion. We were both staring at this towering shadow, neither of us daring to move. After a moment it stepped towards us, and our feeble hope that it was just a deer on its back legs was smashed. To this day we still don't know exactly what we saw, but the word Goatman is the best way I have of describing it. A pair of woolly legs and a fuzzy abdomen gave way to smooth, humanoid chest and arms. The face was horrifying, a mix of goat and man that still haunts me. I watched as it opened its mouth, my mother's voice coming cheerily from it, but the sound was warped and too deep. "Hi baby girl. Good morning Lonnie." To this day I don't remember getting back to the campsite. I remember screaming, and running as fast as I could away from the creature, but that's it. I don't know if it followed us, or tried to communicate further, and I'm not sure that I want to know. We never did tell my mom or the park rangers about our encounter. We figured that they would tell us we were crazy, or chalk our experience up to the use of recreational substances, so it wasn't worth the hassle. Corey and I have both returned to Elmore since then, but neither of us has ever seen or heard the creature. I've often wondered if we imagined the whole thing, or if it was some sort of weird dream. People don't usually share the exact same dream though, right? Second story. This story was shared by you/alostgirl17. My roommate met the Goatman. On Saturday night my roommate Lauren, her boyfriend Max and I were eating takeout and watching random YouTube videos. Aliens, conspiracy theories, you know the drill. Max put on a Jeff the Killer video and this kick-started us watching a bunch of creepypastas. Eventually we began to watch Annecy's Goatman. I was on the edge of my seat, engrossed in the best creepypasta I had heard since the Slender Man. However, halfway through the video my friend Lauren said in a terrified whisper, "Please turn that off." I closed the video. It wasn't unusual for Lauren to get a little freaked, however, when I looked at her, tears streaked her face and every inch of her body was vibrating with tension. Her fingernails dug so hard into her hands she drew blood. It took half an hour to bring her out of her petrified state. When she was reasonably calmer, in her bed, cocooned in the safety of her blankets, I asked her what was wrong. What follows is an accurate account of what Lauren told me on Saturday night. When I was 15 my parents decided to get divorced. In all honesty, I was relieved after living for months in an unhappy home. Mom and I were going to keep the house and Dad was going to find somewhere new. In order to give him time to find a new place my mom decided to fly out to her hometown in Texas and stay with her sister for a month. I was given the option of going with Mom or staying at home, in London, with Dad. I decided to go to Texas with Mom as I'd never visited the USA before. My aunt had twins a year younger than I and lived in a farmhouse with many acres of land. I figured I'd have an amazing summer with my cousins, exploring and adventuring. We arrived and my Aunt Jess was lovely. She had the same blonde hair and voluminous figure as my mom. My cousins Hank and Courtney were lanky, blonde bundles of energy. The three of us got along like a house on fire. In the beginning anyway. The first few days were spent swimming in the lake on their land, eating a picnic of tuna sandwiches and Reese's Pieces for lunch. We were exploring the attic one afternoon when we came across a tent. I immediately suggested we should have a campout. This thrilled the twins, who suggested we camp by the lake. I disagreed. We always play at the lake. There was a massive woodland less than 10 minutes from the house. Why don't we camp in the woods? Hank and Courtney looked at each other and burst into hysterical laughter. Then they turned their freckled faces towards me, looking grave. "Those woods are haunted," Courtney stated. "Yeah," Hank agreed. "Everyone knows that." This only made me want to camp in the haunted woodland more, but Hank and Courtney refused. After days of pestering, they agreed to explore the woods during daylight, so one day, following lunch, we headed to the woods. It was cool in the wood, the trees offered excellent protection from the hot, Texan sun. A narrow, dirt path snaked through the trees, so, for a while, we stuck to the path, venturing further in the woods. "But let's not go too far in," Courtney kept repeating. At some point, Hank seen a tree swing just slightly off the path and sprinted towards it. I sprinted after him, and reluctantly Courtney did too. "Climb on." Hank gestured towards the swing and I clambered on board. He began to push me, so high. I was laughing hysterically, feeling free as a bird. Hank and Courtney laughed too, and soon all of Courtney's fear was thrown out the window. She was giggling, "My turn next. My turn next." Then, we heard a rustling in the bushes. Heart racing, I dismounted the swing. "What was that noise?" asked Courtney, fear creeping back into her voice. "Just an animal," Hank said. He didn't sound sure. The air was filled with a horrible smell, kind of like sour milk. We all covered our mouths and noses with our hands. Courtney gagged a little. "Let's get out of here," I said, a sickening feeling in the pit of my stomach. The smell followed us all along the path, and every once in a while we'd hear a rustle or the snap of a branch from the depths of the forest. "Just an animal, just an animal," Hank kept muttering. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, so towards the end of the path I grabbed both Hank and Courtney's hands, and together we sprinted home. We all agreed we would never go back to the woods again. 2 nights later I was in bed, drifting off to sleep on the sofa bed in basement, which long ago had been converted in an awesome games room with a pool table, TV and sound system. The basement stairs were really creaky and I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. I sat up and there was Courtney at the foot of the stairs. This wasn't unusual, as many nights, when Courtney couldn't sleep, she'd wander down to the basement and we'd cozy up in the sofa bed together and watch movies until we drifted. "Not tonight, Courtney," I told her. "I'm dead beat." "Dead beat," she repeated. There was that smell again, like sour milk. "Yeah, you know. Tired. My turn next," she said, and I noticed there was something weird about her voice. Each word was drawn out like she was just learning to speak. Her pitch was off too, way too shrill. I flipped on the lamp next to my mattress to get a better look at her, and her eyes were blank and emotionless, just staring right through me. A chill crept over me as she staggered, like a baby learning to walk, over to the sofa and sat herself down on it. "Are you okay?" I asked her. "OHKY," she repeated in that same, off-canter voice. Then her whole body started to shake and convulse. I sprinted out of the basement, to my aunt's room, and started to batter on her bedroom door. She appeared moments later, eyes full of sleep, dressed in a pink robe. "Lauren." She sounded annoyed, but then must have seen the terror in my face. Lauren, is everything okay? Her tone now alarmed. Courtney is in the basement. I think she's having a seizure. The commotion had risen Hank from his bed and the three of us ran down to the basement. Only when we got to the basement Courtney was gone. The sour smell still lingered in the air. We ran back upstairs calling out Courtney's name. She appeared moments later dressed in pajamas, not the shorts and tee I had seen her wear moments before. What the hell is going on? Courtney asked, both confusion and annoyance in her voice. My aunt explained to her what I had told her. If this is a joke, Lauren, it's not funny. Courtney turned on me. Waking me from bed at 2 a.m. is one thing, how dare you wake my mom? But. My aunt interjected, Courtney, your cousin is going through a difficult period right now. Divorce isn't easy. Go easy on her. I tried to defend what I saw, but it was no use. They all looked at me like I was a raving lunatic. I returned to the basement and sat awake all night with the light on. The next day my cousins were super frosty with me and my mom gave me a lecture about playing pranks on the family. I was so confused. Were the twins pranking me? If so, it was a super cruel joke. It didn't seem like their style. Maybe I had dreamed the whole incident. A few nights later I was in bed asleep when I was awakened by a piercing scream, Courtney's scream. I sprinted from the basement to where my mom, aunt, Hank and Courtney were all gathered on the upstairs landing. You! Courtney thrust her finger at me, shaking like a leaf. Me? I said dumbly. I woke up and she was standing over my bed staring at me. It was really creepy. She just kept repeating, Courtney, 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 in a scary voice. When I screamed she ran away. Now I was sure Courtney was the one playing pranks and I wasn't gonna let her get me in any more trouble. Bullshit. It slipped out and my mom gave me a sharp slap from my tongue. My Aunt Jess rounded on me. Bullshit, huh? I seen you sprinting down the stairs wearing the very same night shirt you are wearing now. That's impossible. Are you calling your aunt a liar? My mom demanded. No, but. I trailed off while my family all glared at me. I'm so sorry, Jessica. Mom apologized on my behalf. I won't have your daughter terrorize my kids. Aunt Jess replied, hands on hips. We left Texas and flew back to England the following day, 2 weeks early. My mom keeps in touch with Jess. I've tried emailing Hank and Courtney but they never respond. That bridge is forever burned. Since then I had convinced myself the whole situation was a weird prank Courtney played on me that got out of hand. That was until I heard the story of the Goatman. Now I think the whole situation was something much more sinister. Max and I are completely sure Lauren is being truthful. She is not the type to make up ghost stories, and if you guys had seen the fear in her eyes you would all be convinced too. Max and I have convinced her to reach out to Hank and Courtney. If the Goatman still haunts the woods by their house he could easily strike again. Lauren has asked them if the three of us can fly out to Texas and investigate. We are awaiting a response. I'll keep you all updated. Third story. This story was shared by you/Lavender Gomes. I believe in Goatman. Goatman lives. I know it. I remember, the first time I heard a story about him, I didn't believe it. Ghosts, I believed in. Spirits, sure. But a half-man, half-goat creature that wandered the woods and terrorized people. This was too much, even for my fertile imagination. My grandfather grew up in northern Ontario, where his family worked in the mining industry. He was the first one who ever told me about Goatman. One bitterly cold winter, when he was just a boy, a huge snowstorm blew through the area. He remembered, at dinner time, his father talking about how, when he was making his way home after gathering some firewood in the woods, he saw in the distance the figure of a man walking through the forest, bent against the wind and snow. He had called to him, but received no answer. Everyone thought it was a wandering vagrant, or someone who had gotten lost as the storm blew up, and was searching for shelter. That night, though, Grandpa said that his family had woken up and seen what looked like a man walking around the house, looking in the windows. Come morning, they went to check it out. Instead of fresh human boot or shoe prints in the snow, they saw cloven hoof prints. And that's where the story ended. His story, anyway. Mine had yet to begin. My grandparents had moved a couple of hours away from that area, and I grew up living next door to them, in a gold mining town. I am an only child, but my best friend was my cousin, Tanya. She lived in the same town. We'd spend every summer in the woods around my grandparents and my house. Those woods had a magical quality to them. They felt extremely safe and wholesome, like the 100-acre wood from Winnie the Pooh or something. We'd play for hours in those woods, pretending we were Celtic princesses, or pioneer women. But one day, we wandered a little too far. This was northern Ontario, so our entire town was surrounded by bush and rock, being part of the Canadian Shield. Not far beyond the safe, happy-feeling woods behind my grandparents' house was the lake the town had taken its name from. When I was little, it was a beautiful spot, but the mine had drained it due some exploration. A chain-link fence surrounded the perimeter, and our parents had always warned us not to go near there. It could be really dangerous. Tanya was a show-off. At 16 years old she was only 1 year ahead of me, but boy did she lord it over me. She was petite, with graceful curves, blonde hair, blue eyes and a flawless complexion. Boys fawned over her. I, on the other hand, was an awkward 15-year-old, with thick, long brown hair, glasses, braces and an acne problem. She was sweet, and always told me I was pretty and helped me to feel better about myself, but she made no secret that she thought she was drop-dead gorgeous. And she was right. Tanya was also a lot more worldly than me. I was bookish, naive, and didn't have experience with boys. She'd already had several boyfriends and had tried smoking and drinking, 2 things I refused to do. So, it didn't surprise me when she said we should travel down to the fence that bordered the drained-out lake and flash the few guys who would be sitting in their diggers, sorry, I don't know the right word for the equipment they used, that were working there. Tan, no. I said. They're like 40 years old probably. So what? I like older men, she said, and started off through the dense forest towards the lake. Yeah, I'm sure you do, I said, rolling my eyes. I sure as hell wasn't going to be flashing my barely developed breasts at some random older guys, but I wasn't going to let Tanya claim to be the daring and brave one and go on her own either. I've always been sensitive. But I was shocked that Tanya couldn't feel the palpable change in atmosphere when we left the higher ground of the woods that were closer to my grandparents' house to scramble down some of the rocky forest that ran down closer to the lake. I thought maybe it was a change in altitude at the time, but the woods suddenly seemed quieter, stuffier, and danker. Tanya was rambling on about her latest conquest, Jordan, a boy from grade 12, when we finally came into view of the lake behind the fence. She stopped in her tracks, and looked back at me with a disgusted look on her face. What the hell is that smell? She asked me, her pert nose wrinkling. It smells like ass. Ugh, I don't know, I replied. My nostrils were being assaulted by a smell I had never experienced before, something pungent and animalistic and wrong. Maybe there's some kind of bear cave or wolf den nearby, I added. Maybe it's coming off of the lake, she said, and we moved closer to the fence to look through. My grandparents had this large, two-story brick house right at the edge of town. The house was on a hill, so that walking in the front door, the main floor was flush with the ground, but when you walked out French doors that led off of the breakfast room onto the deck outside, you were a good story up off the ground. And from that vantage point, you could see the drained-out lake, surrounded by forest. Usually, there were 1 or 2 bulldozers working there at any given time of the day. But today, there was nothing. No bulldozers, no workers. That's odd, I said. Where are the workers? Even the bulldozers are gone. What day is it? I asked Tanya, thinking maybe it was a holiday or something and the guys didn't have to work. It's Monday, she said, raising her eyebrows. Who knows, though? Maybe the bulldozers had to be serviced. Let's walk around some more, now that we're here. The smell was still there, and we were by no means getting used to it, but our sense of adventure won out over our sense of disgust at the musky, foreign aroma. We walked in silence around the fence line, and every twig that snapped underneath our feet sounded super loud, echoing out across the empty expanse of what used to be a crystal-clear lake. We couldn't hear any birds or other animals scurrying around in the forest, but neither of us said anything, because before we had a chance to, we were confronted by something deeply unsettling. What the hell is that? I asked, as we turned a bend. It looked like a huge, wrenching hole had been torn into the fence, which was splayed open. Why is there a hole in the fence? Probably teenagers coming to part here, Tanya mumbled, but I could tell she felt scared. We walked to the hole in the fence, and were hit with the same scent that had been lingering around us like a ton of bricks. Tanya gagged, and hunched over, trying not to vomit. I must have had a stronger stomach. I pulled my shirt up over my nose and went to look more closely at the fence. We've got to get out of here, I said, seeing dark, wiry fur stuck in some of the broken fence. I think a bear, or something, has been here. I didn't hear anything from Tanya, but I was too busy looking at the fence. My heart dropped as I saw a streak of blood in the mud just inside the empty lake. No, not a streak, a trail of blood. I don't know what came over me, but I knew I had to follow that trail. I looked back, and Tanya was sitting, pale-faced with her arms wrapped around her, on a fallen log by the fence. There's blood on the ground, I said, my voice echoing nervously on the lake. Blood on the ground, she mumbled in a strange, monotone voice. What the hell? Yes, genius, and I'm going to figure out where it came from, see if anyone is hurt, I snapped back. Tanya was a notorious girly girl, and I figured she was in shock from seeing it, too. Stay there, and if I'm not back in a few minutes, go for help. Help, she said, tilting her head and looking at me with blank eyes. I shuddered, but turned to follow the trail. I had only walked a few paces into the drained-out lake when the going got pretty rough. It dipped down pretty steeply from where I had entered the fence through the hole that was torn into it, and about 20 yards off I could see one of the bulldozers that was usually busy working, flipped over onto its side. The trail of blood I was following got more saturated. Instead of streaks here and there were puddles. My stomach was churning. I had stopped in my tracks, about 10 meters from the bulldozer, when I saw a man's boot sitting in a puddle of blood. I suddenly realized that I was a 15-year-old girl, who was all of 5'3" and weighed 110 pounds, completely unarmed and incapable of defending herself against whatever had left all that blood. Suddenly, I felt panicked. I decided it must have been a sick bear or wolf who had picked off one of the workers. I remember my parents telling me that wolves and bears will usually leave you alone, and that only the sick ones ever go after humans. I turned and ran up the embankment and to the opening in the fence. But Tanya was gone. Tanya. I called out, not too loudly, for fear that whatever crazed, rabid animal that was out there would hear me and find me. Where are you? Stop screwing around. I searched the area for her, but there was no sign of her. The sun was starting to set. I figured that she got tired of waiting for me and freaked herself out and headed home without me. I was almost as mad at the thought of that as I was scared. But then I noticed something. The smell was gone. The smell from before, that horrible, acrid smell, was completely gone. The wind hadn't changed, nothing had. But the woods now smelled like woods. And there was birdsong. Weird. I walked as quickly as I could back to my grandparents' house, and when I went in, everyone was sitting down to dinner. Including Tanya. I quickly washed up and joined them at the table. You'll never believe what Tanya and I found out in the woods. I said. Around the table sat my grandparents, my mom and dad, and Tanya's dad. And Tanya, who was looking at me wide eyes and her head tilted oddly to the side. You were in the woods? Grandma said, as she spooned some boiled potatoes onto my plate. I hope you didn't go too far. That's the thing, I said, looking at my parents and then hastily away. We went to look through the fence at the lake. What? My father demanded, his face like thunder. That's so dangerous. There are sinkholes all over that place. I know, I'm sorry, but you need to listen. I replied. No need to listen, Tanya mumbled. What? I said, turning to look at her. She smiled wanly at me, got up from the table and left the room. Just what is going on? Tanya's dad demanded, glaring at me. The adults seated around the table were all looking at me with a mixture of irritation and curiosity. I burst into tears. Something terrible happened down there. I said, and my mother came to put her arms around me. Hysterically, I told them about how we found a hole in the fence, and how I had seen blood in the mud, and a man's boot, and a tipped-over bulldozer. And then, my mother ushered me from the room as my grandfather picked up the phone to call the police. We didn't finish having dinner there. My parents and I drove home, and I went to bed early. I was shaken from the day, and entirely exhausted. They told me the police may want to talk to me in the morning, but not to worry about it. I knew they were too scared about what had happened to lecture me. The next day, my grandparents came over and told me that the police had searched the grounds and had found the hole in the fence, but nothing else. There was no blood to be found, no boot, no bulldozer. They had asked me if my imagination had gotten away with me, and I swore that it didn't. But I saw the concern in their eyes as they looked at themselves, and me, and back to each other. I stopped talking about it. And they stopped asking. Later that day, Tanya came over. My parents had let her in, and she flounced into my room and flopped onto my bed. She punched my arm, and said, "Why the hell did you leave me on my own in the woods yesterday?" "What?" "You left me," I said, looking at her confusedly. "When I got back, you were gone. I wasn't even 5 minutes." "No, I sat there waiting for you," she said, her eyebrows raised. "I waited until after dark, and you didn't come out. Then, I went back to Grandma and Grandpa's. They said that you'd left with your parents." "You're shitting me, and I don't like it, I've already been through enough," I snapped at her, feeling sick to my stomach. "I'm not shitting you, I swear," she said, sounding scared. "Something weird is going on. Last night, when I got back, Grandma and Grandpa, and Dad, seemed upset. I figured they were mad at me for being gone so long, so I apologized. Dad said to relax, and that I'd only been away from the table for 10 minutes. Then he told me about how they'd called the police and how your parents had taken you home. What the fuck is going on? I felt like someone had thrown ice water over me. Tanya. You had dinner with us last night. You were at the house when I got back, and it wasn't dark yet. We sat there, in silence. We couldn't figure it out. Tanya asked if she could sleep over, and our parents agreed. We watched Friends reruns on my TV until we fell asleep in my double bed. It was the smell that woke me up. That same horrible, metallic, musky smell, like sweat and wet dog and blood and smoke all in one. And then I heard it. A tap, tap, tap on my window. I sat slowly up in bed, reached for my glasses on the bedside table and put them on. Outside my house, looking in my window, was Tanya. She had a wide smile on her face, her head was tilted to the side, and every couple of seconds, she was vibrating. I looked down beside me in the bed. And there was Tanya, fast asleep. By the time I had shaken her awake, it was gone. We turned the TV back on and watched game shows until the morning light streamed through my window. I went to look outside my bedroom, which was at the front of the house, above my mother's rose garden. There, in the damp soil, I saw hoof prints. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/_coyotes_. Goatman while camping. What was this? Hey, I'm not really new, I've used Reddit before, but I wanted to make this profile to tell everyone some pretty terrifying stuff that has happened to me in the past. Of all the creepiest, this story takes the cake. If you've read the Anansi's Goatman story, you'll find similarities in mine. I couldn't believe some stuff when I read it and how it compared to this experience. It was 2007, I was with a couple of my friends camping. I was 16 and was just with some 16 to 18-year-olds on this fun camping trip out in the woods behind some of these guys' houses. We picked a spot in a clearing where it would be like a little party kind of site, although I don't do drugs or even smoke weed or any of that. I grew up with that going on all around me, so I tried to avoid it. But nobody brought weed or anything along, I don't think. So we all hung out in this clearing with 3 different tents set up and with a fire pit in the middle. We had planned to spend 4 to 5 days, it was summer vacation so we didn't have school, I think this was early August. Anyway, we all decided to hang out in the clearing, roasting marshmallows, and everyone but me having beers. I sat around making s'mores and the sun was just beginning to set and we were all having a good time. At around 7 o'clock or so, we heard something moving in the bushes nearby and someone threw an empty beer bottle at the bushes. We heard the smash and watched something climb out of the bushes and lumber back into the trees. We thought it was just some psycho person, but everyone got a little bit nervous. Later that night I was asleep in the tent with 3 other people, the only person I knew was my friend, Paul, who invited me along. I remember everything being silent and then I heard a sort of popping sound by the fire and we all sat up. Crawling out, we could hear people in the other tent's voices saying, "The fuck was that?" Paul unzipped the tent and we crawled out. The fire which we had put out about an hour or 2 ago was now roaring with flames. We put it out and thought maybe someone poured gasoline all over the fire and lit a match or lighter and lit the fire. But we never heard the gas pouring or a match being struck/lighter being flicked. We also didn't hear anybody running away because we would have heard them. It was at this point, there was an awful smell but had a stuffy nose and couldn't make it out really. It may have been a skunk, but Paul said one of the other guys said, it was like rotten meat, but we had not smelled it earlier or since. Some other people began holding their shirts up to their noses as if a pungent smell had just appeared. We were all a little on edge, but I guess some people agreed, fuck it, let's just stay here. Nobody brought any guns to fend ourselves off, but one guy, who was about 18, said he had a pocket knife. Our second day here, nothing happened until it became night again. At around 4 a.m., we were all fast asleep and awoken by noises behind our tent. We started to get out when Paul said, "Shut the fuck up for a minute." We sat in silence listening to the noises which sounded like voices I couldn't make out. The voices seemed to be coming closer to us and we quietly climbed out of the tent. The voices still approaching our camp, the two other guys in our tent crept to the other tents and woke the other people up telling them to get out here at once. All 13 of us stood quietly listening to the voices get closer and louder. At the point where they had gotten behind our tent, we heard the voices stop but an eerie humming noise was coming from the trees all around us. One of the guys, I think named Ben, who was 17 or 18 walked to about 10 feet from the tree line where the voices had been coming from. He said, "Oi. Who is there?" and we quietly waited for a response. We heard nothing except distant crickets. He walked back to us and right then we heard the voices moving away which to me sounded like what Ben had asked, "Oi. Who's there?" but it didn't sound like Ben moving away, almost like something was trying to mimic what he sounded like. I could hear the voice sort of crackly and jumpy repeating those words as it moved off into the distance. We all got back to our tents but didn't sleep. The next day, someone had left to their house to grab something. They came back a little later with a potato gun saying he'd shoot the fuck out of the thing bothering our campsite. Around 7 p.m., not really partying but just huddled around a fire, a girl, just one of two stands up, practically pissing herself and we find out what's wrong. Here's one of the similarities I found with the well-known Goatman story. She said that last night, when we were listening to the voices, there was another person with us. There was 13 of us now, but she insisted that there had been a 14th. Reading the Anansi Goatman story and connecting that experience later made my butt clench. We all started to get nervous again and Ben told us he was going to run back to his house. He and Potato Gun Guy were neighbors, and he said he was going to get his father to come out here with a gun and wait. Someone went with him and Paul and I were just talking to each other about how we could leave early if shit got too chaotic, which was starting to get to now. We were in the middle of talking about how we should pack up when we saw Ben standing in the woods. It was clearly him with his blue hoodie and jeans and he was looking straight at us from about 40 feet away, but we didn't know what the fuck he was doing. The person who went with him wasn't standing next to him, it was just him standing alone watching us. It was a 25-minute walk back to his house, but he couldn't have been back 5 minutes later. Everyone got really uncomfortable and people started yelling, "Hey Ben! What are you doing?" but he just kept watching us. We watched as he seemed to slink back into the trees. By now, people were scared out of their minds and I was too. Why was Ben being a prick and just staring at us and not doing anything? We decided to pile into one tent and wait. A short while later the other Ben turned up with his dad and the other person that went with him and his dad was holding a hunting rifle. Ben told him what happened with the voices and the father walked that way into the trees and took a look around. He said it felt like eyes were watching him from every direction. Paul then told Ben's dad that we just saw another Ben standing in the woods staring at us. Ben's dad walked over there and looked around too. He came back and said he could stay with us and the gun but said he would control it because if we got drunk and started shooting a gun around, we'd all kill ourselves. He slept in Ben's tent. It was our third night here and it was really fucking creepy. We quietly listened for it being anywhere nearby. Paul had a funny look in his eyes and started sweating. He later told me that while we were all sitting around, he saw a strange figure moving through the woods moving its arms around in a strange jumpy motion. Around 2 a.m., we were all going to get ready for bed and we heard it. It was saying something but in a highish voice. It sounded like it was saying, "Boy. Who's there?" completely mimicking what Ben had said the night before. Ben's dad tried to pinpoint where the voice was coming from and fired a shot into the trees. That gunshot was loud as fuck. Right after, we could hear a creepy chanting like male voice. I was scared, Paul was scared, everyone was. The chanting sounded like a deep voice chanting, so not multiple people. Underneath the chanting, we could hear something mumbling noises. Again another shot was fired, but I saw what Ben's dad was shooting at. It was a figure crouched low by some bushes. It looked like a direct hit, but the figure did not move. Instead it stood up, sort of hunched over, and moved back into the forest. We raced back into our tents, and I could hear crying and moaning coming from right behind our tent. All four of us in the tent were getting scared, and then I could kind of smell a strong vinegar smell that was very powerful. Then, I noticed what looked like fingertips moving along the tent wall and to the door, and moved down the zipper to grab the part you use to open. Paul dove over to the zipper and held it down as whoever or whatever tried to pull it open. Paul and one other guy in the tent started yelling, "Who's out there?" And after a minute, we could hear a screeching noise as this thing took off into the darkness. We decided to say, "Fuck the fourth and fifth day, let's get out of here in the morning." Here's the scariest experience of that night. At 3:45 a.m., checking my watch, I had to go pee. Since what had just occurred not long ago, I decided I wasn't getting out of the tent, and maybe I could stick my bird out of a small zipper opening, but then I pictured whatever it was out there biting or ripping my thing off, so I decided to open up the tent, slither outside just slightly, and pee to the side of the door. As soon as I was finished, I noticed someone by the furthest tent away. I grabbed my flashlight beside my pillow and turned it on and shined it towards the person. It looked like Paul, back facing to me, hunched over by the tent. But Paul was right behind me, sleeping in the tent. I crawled back inside but kept my light shined on the other Paul. I whispered, "Paul, wake up," and the moment he did, I looked outside to see the other Paul stand up and turn facing toward me and stare at me. I dove back in and leapt under my sleeping bag and huddled there awake as I explained to Paul what I had just seen. I guess at one point in the night, I was facing another way and was freaking out, but one of the guys in the tent said he woke up, eyes still half closed as he rolled over. He could see the other Paul looking through the part in the tent flap I didn't close. He thought it was just Paul coming to wake them up, but realized the real Paul was asleep right beside him. We packed up and left. So I guess that's the creepiest thing that happened to me. I don't exactly know where this forest was. It was on private property, I think, but goddamn was that fucking scary. I have a couple different stories I can share, but I don't think they were as scary as this. Fifth story. This story was shared by u/Sutkak. This happened 2 Fridays before NYE. I was at home with my friend, Samantha, a few hours after school ended, when my dad called me to let me know that he wasn't going to come home that night. There was going to be a really shitty storm, and said he'd rather stay at a friend's house with a few co-workers than drive 2 hours. My dad is a construction worker. He works at different locations for every new project. This one was far. My mom came home not too long after, drenched in rain. She talked to Sam for a bit before telling us she'd be upstairs taking a shower and filling out some paperwork from the office. Shit was thrown into the air at around 8 p.m., when Sam and I heard knocking on the door. It was already weird, because who the fuck is even out in this weather? It was pouring rain and the streets looked like an actual stream of piss. I went down to the door, dragging Sam with me, only to be greeted by nothing. We were looking out the door for a little under 5 seconds when we heard knocking again. Now, this is when the shit that was thrown into the air reached and hit the fan. Sam and I instantly pissed ourselves when we realized someone was knocking on my back door being the door leading to the backyard. We quietly went up the stairs to my mom's room, finding her asleep, not even changed out of her work clothes. I woke her up immediately and told her someone was in our backyard. This obviously caused alarm, and seeing her so freaked out freaked Sam and I out even more. This might not sound as scary to you, but being home without my dad in the house was scary enough on its own. Mom went down into the kitchen, with us trailing not even 2 feet behind her, and she pulled out her rolling pin. Before we could reach the door, the knocking stopped. Mom reached over and pulled the curtain back. All Sammy and Mom saw was pitch black, but I swear I saw someone standing a few feet away from the door. Maybe it was because I was the only one of us facing its direction, but it was tall as fuck. Like 7 feet and maybe over. That's all I could tell you because that's all I saw of it. It was probably just one of the tree branches. It's really windy out, too. Mom suggested. I could tell Sammy wasn't too sure, and I knew damn well it wasn't a tree branch, but why freak the rest of them out? I know now I should have told them so we could have left, but I kept quiet for their sake. About an hour after that, Mom decided to go to the department store down the street to pick up some dinner and left both of us at home. It was only 5 minutes later when we heard knocking again. I quickly felt uneasy. It could be your mom. I went down to the door and asked who it was. The following 5 seconds of silence were the longest 5 seconds of my life. It's me. It was Mom, but at the same time I felt like it wasn't. Looking back now, I realize her voice sounded like it was lacking all human characteristics. It wasn't playful, nor was it frustrated at how long we were keeping her in the rain. It sounded like she didn't even know what emotions were. I opened the door without unlocking the chain, and was greeted by my mom. Sam and I let her in, and she came without any bags. She sat down on the couch for a few minutes, looking around. She was so fucked up. She seemed glitchy, like her actions weren't flowing smoothly. Mom, are you okay? You don't seem right. Her eyes looked at me before the rest of her face turned. It was just a long walk. Cold, outside. Raining. She kept listing words and phrases that made little sense. I was getting more uneasy by the second, but I think Sam was just glad we weren't home alone anymore. The scariest thing that happened that night happened during one of Mom's rambling. Sammy had asked her what we were having for dinner, and she started listing more foods that we didn't even have. Halfway through her rant, I received a text. From Mom. Do you girls want lasagna? Ask Sammy what she wants. Take your time deciding, it's so warm in here. X. My heart instantly dropped. Mom was right in front of me, talking about fish fingers. Sam and, whatever was pretending to be, Mom directed their attention to me. I was panting and, according to Sam, all color had drained from my face. Who is it? Mom asked. Wrong number. I quickly flashed a smile. You look tired, Mom. Do you want to go to bed? Sam and I will make dinner. I think I just need a bath. We nodded and she stood up and made her way to the stairs. She was at the bottom of the stairs when I pulled out my phone to take a photo. I looked down at it for 1 second to cancel the 20% remaining notification, but when I looked back up, Mom was already at the top step. I can't stress this enough, the time in which I looked at my phone and looked back up was impossible for someone to walk 13 steps. I ran back to Sammy and waited until we both heard the water in the bathroom running. Sam, my mom texted me. What? When that thing was talking to us, my mom texted me. She started freaking out and thinking for reasons. Maybe she meant to send a text earlier, but it only delivered now. It seemed valid. Apple is always glitchy like that. But we decided to call her anyway just to make sure. Just as the phone started ringing, someone knocked on the door. We went to see who it was. Sammy was about to open it, but I put my hand in front of her. I was so terrified at this point that I was in tears. Sammy stared at me in confusion. "Hey Mom," I said into the phone. I was shaking, and as soon as Sammy heard me say that, she looked like she was about to throw up. "Open the door, it's freezing outside." I sighed in relief and threw door open. Mom was standing there with the phone pressed to her ear and her shopping bags around her feet. We quickly explained what was happening, and it took my mom 2 minutes of hearing the story for her to climb up the stairs and walk towards the bathroom. She literally kicked the door open and found the tub almost filled to the rim. The window was also open and the fly screen was torn. The rest of the night consisted of us trying to get over what happened. We ended up sleeping together in my mom's room, and my dad came home early next morning. I only started researching a few days ago, and I found out it was the Goatman. I also came across this story, which shares similar aspects. Please read the story I linked, because it's a lot more terrifying and has more encounters than I did. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.